Hey there, I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar. I also teach Intro to World Religions courses. So I come at the conversation of biblical studies with this larger picture in mind as well. And one of the things that's been going through my mind lately is this bit. I wish that more people were deeper informed on what religion or religions are, what they do for people. And so I decided I would do this quick little presentation. So one of the first things you learn when you go into a world religions course, which is a very Western idea to begin with, is you talk about what religion is and is not, what kinds of things people have decided after watching and observing humanity, right? What kinds of things do we think and see are a part of what we're calling religion? And that in and of itself is really eye-opening. So that's what we're going to cover here. But the other piece of this is that the language of religion is a Western construct that came about when people from the West were observing people from other cultures. They wanted to try to do some defining and some box creating, okay? And then that led to needing things to be more nuanced than just, gods and behavior, right? So when people talk about, religion and as if it's interchangeable with this idea about like deities, as if defining yourself as a deist or a theist or a non-theist, atheist, like as if that's central to that whole conversation of religion, that is, in my opinion, actually missing a good bulk of what's going on for people. So I don't believe that religion is in itself a bad thing about humanity. I think that there are many things about what we have labeled as being a part of religion that are actually really quite beautiful and beneficial. So I wanted to go over a version of the list of things that we will talk about in a world religions course, an intro to world religions, that make up, the things on this list might be a part of what you would call a religion, but not all the things on the list will be, okay? So let's take a look at what one version of those list of things that are a part of religions around the world looks like. Okay, so the first two, as you can see, are about maintaining traditions and or a belief system. Those are not the same thing. Traditions would be things that we do in this community that we're passing along to our children and passing along, and that make up the way we do things around here, that make up the way we think and believe. So this would be related to world views, right? And some of these, sure, come from ancient places and need to be replaced, right? Some of them are outdated, and for sure, things that are traditions can be very difficult to change. I get that, right? But the idea of maintaining traditions, passing them along, or having a way to frame what you're going to teach your children about what you believe, this is not inherently a bad thing, right? The use of myth and symbol is actually another one of those kind of universal human things, regardless of whether you're going to put it within the framework of what we're calling religion or not. We use symbols all the time. And so this use of symbols in a particular realm of life, that's just human, right? And the use of myth that was a hard one for me when I first encountered this idea of talking about myth and religion as if those go together. That was hard for me initially, coming from a conservative Christian perspective, but the use of myth is also just a thing you find in human societies. Not necessarily everyone in any given society is down with those myths, right? But that's not what we're getting at here. We're talking about what humans do with symbols and myths in order to connect to each other, in order to understand each other, in order to communicate, okay? So numbers 3 and 4 in this particular list, concept of salvation and sacred places and objects. So the concept of salvation, I think for a lot of people, is going to sound very much about heaven, but The thing is, even within monotheistic traditions, salvation itself is often defined as what we're doing here on earth to make things better. What are we as humans doing to address, creating more just spaces and things like that? So even this concept of salvation is not owned by Christians, right? It has many different ways of being applied in different contexts around the world. And number 4, sacred places and objects. I do personally struggle with this idea of designating something as sacred and something as profane, right? That dualism is deeply problematic for me. But I will say that there is something about having a way to say, this is a special place for us as a community. This is a place where we do certain behaviors, or it helps us ground ourselves. We're going to protect this space. These objects are useful in these kinds of ways. So even if you're not on board with the language of sacred, what this idea is talking about is something that a lot of people around the world embrace and have space for, right? Saying that, this place is important to us. That's what we're talking about with that idea or that definition. So again, I'm going to push back a little bit on this issue of sacred, right? I think that for many people, the point here is to say, yeah, we have processes, we have rituals, we have things we do at certain seasons of the year or in response to certain events, that kind of a thing, right? That we have, in a sense, this is part of what has been passed down, right? Maintaining traditions. So regardless of whether you identify as connected to religion, this is a thing that humans do, right? We create actions, we create rituals that help us in some way to, manage our anger, our fear, our grief, our celebrate, right? All of the different things. So there are actions and rituals that are part of human communities. And then the same is true for sacred writings, right? Again, some writings are considered more important than others. And I think on a certain level, I think that's legitimate on a certain level, right? There's a place for all different types of writing, okay? But when we talk about sacred writings, what you're really saying is these writings are important for us as a community. That's all, right? Okay, so 7 and 8, community and a place of worship and the sacred experience. Okay, so 7, community. And this in and of itself, to me, is actually the heart of what religion is all about. It is about creating a connection between humans. And a place of worship, again, yes, certainly especially within monotheistic traditions, worship has very strong connotations and fairly kind of structured ideas, structured behaviors and practices, right? But again, this concept of what is happening does not belong just to buildings, right? It doesn't just happen in a church, a mosque, a temple, or synagogue, right? It's not just a monotheistic practice. The concept of worship can be defined in lots of different ways. So many people believe that that is a term that applies for something humans do to make their God happy. But that is not the only understanding of worship, okay? The other thing is the sacred experience, I think, could be maybe relabeled. And there are theorists of religion that want to relabel that. Instead of saying sacred experience, I'm going to talk about some sort of numinous experience or some sort of a different spirit. I don't want to use the word spiritual either, but there are other ways of talking about something that is a little bit extraordinary or a little bit different from everyday living, okay? And that in and of itself can happen in lots of times and places. is that an individualistic thing? Is that a group thing? Those are also on the table in terms of this is not just one particular thing, okay? So that there are groups of people who have spaces where they embody rituals and actions, and it leads to what is for them a sacred experience or a life-benefiting experience. That's not just a thing you want to, that's a positive thing, right? I think we could all say that's a positive thing, right? Okay, so this list that I'm working with has 12 total, so we're at 9 and 10 here. Codes of ethical behavior and a priesthood or clergy to lead the believers. Again, I'm using what I found in an encyclopedia of world religions. And so that language you might want to push back on. That's fine, right? But codes of ethical behavior is not just something you find in a religious space, but that is one of the things that a community of people will help to produce, will help to support. It gives you a place and a way to pass along what you as a community have decided is the way you're going to behave and participate and interact. I want to get beyond just the language of behavior as if we're monitoring it, but also the idea of the conversations that take place in these communities and spaces, and the ways that we're going to embrace curiosity and dialogue and all of the different pieces here, right? So codes of ethical behavior, again, I think most of the 12 in this list come from someone who comes from a monotheistic background, because religion itself as a place of as something to be studied is heavily Western, okay? And much of Western culture is defined by the 3 primary monotheistic traditions, right? So ethical behavior is something that I am pretty sure every parent I know has tried to inculcate into their children, and they appreciate the support of a community that helps them to do that, right? That's a human desire to do this, to pass along things that lead to everyone's success or flourishing, right? This is a positive. This is not only something that is negative. Are there codes of ethical behavior within certain religious communities that are dangerous or have been harmful to people? Absolutely, yes. But those communities do not own the whole thing, in my opinion, okay? So the same is true, again, for the language used here, a priesthood or clergy to lead the believers. And again, all of the pieces of this are heavily marked from a fairly Christian perspective, or Christian, right, Jewish perspective, monotheistic, let's say, actually all 3. So a priesthood, so people who have been set apart to be leaders in this community is what this is getting at, priesthood or clergy. To lead, I would prefer the language to be community, not the believers, because believer has a heavy Christian connotation to it, right? So, so acknowledging that and going beyond that, what we're talking about is, yeah, there are some people who are good at this role and at that role, and we're going to acknowledge that. And we're going to trust them for their experience and insights. That's what we're getting at here. And finally, and I did leave these 2 for last because I wanted to highlight before we got to this, there are a lot of positives in this list, right? Regardless of how you're going to define things, right? Take a moment to look down this whole list. The use of myth and symbol and maintaining traditions and rituals and sacred spaces, or spaces that are set apart, right? So a god, goddess, or deities, this is one of a dozen on this particular list. It is not the sole defining thing about religion. And as it's talked about in courses, not everything that we might call religion has all of these things. So that's why there is a debate about whether or not, for instance, Buddhism, as typically practiced, should be called a religion or just a philosophy. And on some level, it doesn't really matter because it's practiced the way it's practiced. But then, right, so there are just lots of fun things to dive into here. But, okay, so there may be a god or goddess or multiple deities involved that's how you kind of decide that this thing we're talking about is a religion. And number 12, which I think is often, at least in more deconstructing or progressive circles, this last one has been problematic for a lot of people, right? That there's often a leader or founder with near godlike status or actual godlike status. So whether you're talking about the founder, say Muhammad or Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes the first Buddha, is it the founder or is it the current leader who takes on such authoritative power and responsibility that it becomes problematic? Those things are real, right? Those things are real. But, I'd also like to suggest that there's more than just those 3 examples I just referenced that exist in the world. So my intention here is to highlight that defining religion itself is very complicated. It is not only about a God and whether or not you're worshiping the right one. And the way all of these different things play out for people varies. So I think I'm also responding to, I've seen a lot of content in general that just focuses on the God piece. And so I'd like to expand people's ideas and thoughts beyond just that. And whether or not a person is religious, is an interesting conversation that comes up a lot. What I'm interested in doing with this video is showing that even scholars of these elements of human life don't agree on what that even is pointing to when you use the word religious, right? So I hope this is helpful for you in terms of thinking a bit more broadly, a little bit more deeply, perhaps, about what this thing called religion is all about for humans, right? And that it is not inherently bad or terrible or destructive for people. I know that a lot of people have experienced spaces that were for them, and that is important to be able to point to and address. But there is something bigger, right? I wish everyone could take an Intro to World Religions courses, even if some of the terminology in there is a little bit suspect, as I pointed out, right? There's a big world out there. Okay, that's it. I hope this was helpful.